Yeah, now we're recording. Okay, so what I want to talk about today, and I'm just going to run through a couple of things before we get into the kind of nitty-gritty of what I wanted to cover, which is how we kind of use blend modes and layer blend modes to create textures that we can use to improve our Photoshop documents. Okay, and this is used a lot to either add texture to something or to kind of add a background to a drawing. I've seen it in a few of the examples that you researched. And if you use something that's photographed rather than something you try and draw, you just get that nice realistic texture in the document that kind of gives you a little bit of extra interest there. Okay, but before we go ahead and actually get into that, no, I don't want to update now. Hold on, let me just okay, do not disturb is on. All right, so what I want to do first is just make a new document here. I just want to show you how RGB basically blends together, okay? Because it's kind of important when we use the blend modes to have a little bit of an understanding of how, in particular, the blend modes of different layers work, okay? So essentially I'm going to create a new layer here, okay? And I'm going to fill a few squares with some greys, from white to grey, and then some red, green and blues to kind of show you how those colors work when we actually multiply them with something else. Okay, so I'm going to use Shift F5 to fill the space that I've got here. Okay, so I can fill with a foreground color, a background color, which in this case is black and white, or I can choose another color. Okay, so I'm going to do black first. Okay, and then I've got my marquee tool selected, so I can just move that selection and then do Shift F5 again, and then I'll do 50% grey. Okay, and I'm doing this on a second layer so that I can layer things up, and then I'm gonna do this one as white. Okay, and then I'm gonna do another one here with a gradient of black to white. Okay, so if we just drag this across here, and then my next ones, oops, are going to be straight colors. So I'm going to choose red as 255, so full red, no green and no blue. Okay. And then no red, all green, and no blue. So these are basically the kind of colors that you use to make everything in Photoshop. The red, green, and blue. Everything that we see on screen is made up of these colors, including the whites and greys and everything. So, okay, alright, and I'm going to put an image behind here, so I will grab one of your images from here, and let's just find a good one. I think this is a reasonably good one to use. So if I select the move tool with V and then hold down Command and click on that layer, it's going to grab that layer, and then I can drag it straight across into my other file. Okay, so to select the layer, okay, let's line these up again. So I've got a document here. Okay, if I hold down Command and click on any one of these layers, that's the layer it's going to select. Okay, so I'll drag this one across. If I hold down Command, click here, then I can drag this to another document, or drag across. Okay, that's kind of a neat, quick way of getting images into another file. So basically we've got red, green and blue, black, grey and white, and then this gradient in the middle. And when we blend them, what we're looking at is the blend modes across here in the layers panel. Okay, so we've got different sections for all the blend modes. Okay, so going from the top, we've got darken. So darken, multiply, all of those blend modes will basically make the image behind darker. So it's going to darken those parts of the image, okay? And in a few slightly different ways, okay? And that's really important later on when we're using textures to kind of bring parts of an image out, because if we have textures with little bits of grey and black in them and we use darken, then it's going to add that grey and black to the layer behind. And if we use lighten, then say to lighten to a black line, it's going to add, you know, white specks in that black line, and we'll see some of that later, okay? So if we darken that, oh, I've chosen the wrong layer. Let's select the right layer. So I'm selecting the layer with all the colors on it, okay? So I'm going to darken that, and you can see the black makes it completely black because all the pixels behind it aren't darker than black, so it's darkening it completely, okay? And then the grey runs from black through to grey, where it's darkening some of the lighter areas of the image, through to the white, which isn't doing anything because it would be making the image lighter, okay? And then we don't see the white square because it can't darken anything behind it, because white is white and not this textured color behind, okay? So that's what darken does. And if you use multiply in these different situations, you'll see it's still darkening it, but in a different kind of way, okay? And then we've got things like color burn. So it's basically running an algorithm between the pixel in front and the pixel behind, okay? And I'm not going to get into the math of it because I don't know it, but if you play around with these things with that knowledge that this is going to darken stuff, then you can get some nice effects. So you can see we're getting some nice, rich, kind of dark colors in there that would maybe look like a nighttime scene or something like that. So we can start to play around with it here. And then we've got the reds, greens, and blues with multiply or linear burn, in this case, adding that kind of nice texture to the image behind. Almost looks screen printed on top of there when you start to use those, okay? And then darker color, okay? So it's just adding anything that's darker just as the color. So with lighten, it's going to be completely the reverse. So we'll get the white square and everything from grey to the white area of the image, okay? And then we've got some other options for this as well, where you can see it's doing similar things but in reverse to the darkening, okay? If we come down to the next section, okay, with overlay, soft light, you can see the colors it's ignoring the midtones, the grays. So we're getting the black and the white overlaying and lighting that layer behind, but we're not getting those mid grays. So it's not applying if it's grey, it's applying if it's like got a lot of white pixels in that layer, okay? And so the same for the reds and blues, it's applying some of that color behind it, okay? And then we've got these effects down here which really flip the image. So difference will flip the image behind, okay? So it's making it negative from the white here, okay, and so on and so forth, okay, and then subtracting the value from the layer behind, and that's where I kind of, my head spins with the math, because it's doing a math there to subtract all your white from the front image to make it black, I guess. That's my my kind of layman's understanding of the math that goes on behind Photoshop. And then we've got divide, which is dividing it by the reverse, I guess, the black, okay? We've got the hues, okay, so there's no hue in black, white, or grey, so we just get it desaturated, okay? And then saturation is basically not changing the color of the image behind, but it's applying the level of saturation to that image behind. So the red, green, and blue are doing exactly the same thing because they're all 100% saturation for red, green, and blue, okay? And color applies the colors. There's no color in grey or white. And then luminosity applies the kind of luminosity of the color, okay? Alright, so that's a quick overview of those, but basically if you remember that we've got things that will make the layer behind darker, things that will make the layer behind lighter, and then things that will affect the layer behind in a kind of different way. So they're kind of flipping the color, and then things that will do funky stuff to the layer behind. Okay. All right. So that's the kind of premise of when we're adding textures to things, what we're doing when we're kind of applying these colors in different ways. Okay. So with the images that you've got, there's some nice images here for doing a few things like that. So this document, and when I made the PDF I didn't get everything, so we've got some of the images but not all of them. So these kind of images where we've got this kind of beautiful interwoven texture, you know, we can blend that to make a complete background. Okay, so we can kind of blend that together into one layer to make it a pattern or to make it into a brush. Okay, so we'll have a look maybe at that a little bit later. And then for textures like this, if we overlay those over other textures, then we can use that to add some kind of grainy texture to the background. Okay, I'm going to start with one scan that I made. So I'm just going to go to File and Open. Okay, and we'll just jump to this folder. Okay, so I'm going to run through using this image to start with, and then maybe we'll start to incorporate some of your images in there as well. So we'll open this up. Okay, and basically what we've got is a slightly out of focus, I think it's coffee and soy sauce to make the stain, nothing expensive, and then crumpled up paper, and this should give us a nice kind of texture that we can use and reuse in the background. Okay, so the first thing I want to do here is make this not the background so I can apply it to the layers below. Okay, so I'm going to double click on this layer to open it up. Okay, and then I'm just going to add a layer in the background, and I'm just going to fill that layer with white for the moment. Okay, alright, so with this layer now, what I want to do is actually push some of that white out of the background. So I've mainly got this kind of image stain that I can then use to work with. Okay, so if I come down to my adjustment layers, my levels, okay, so basically this is kind of in the mid-tones of the image. Okay, so the color information for this would be considered like the grays of the image, if you like. So if we pull in our blacks here and our whites from here, then eventually we'll start to end up with just that kind of color stain, okay, in the background. Alright, so you can see we can pare it down so it's almost just that stain, and we can make it lighter or darker as we wish. So it can look like a blood stain, or it can look like, you know, just a little bit of texture. Okay, and then once we've pushed those levels so that we've got some behind it, we can also restrict the color that's coming out. So we can, excuse me, so we can mute it a little bit, so we can remove some of the black. So if we wanted a background that didn't kind of overwhelm the image, then we can mute some of that background so that when we're drawing lines over the top of it or adding other images over the top, it's not completely competing with that image that we're making. Okay, so let's leave it kind of around there with a little bit of that texture flowing out from the edge of it, and then we're going to add another layer, a hue layer. Okay, so hue saturation adjustment layer, and with this layer we're going to jump it straight to colorize. Okay, I'm going to saturate this image. Okay, and now with that saturated I can make this kind of texture into any color that I want, which is useful for design because you might want to push and pull those colors into different textures and layers. Okay, so we'll take that as our first example. Okay, and then this is when the thing we were talking about before with the darkening really comes into play, because if we take this image now and we want to like fill more space with this pattern, then we'll have a look at how that might work. So I'm going to flatten these three layers now into one layer. So I'm happy with kind of what I've got here for the moment. And then before I do that, I'm just going to save it as a Photoshop document so I don't overwrite my original document. So texture 1 edit. I'll save that. Click OK, and then I'm going to right click. Okay. In fact, no, I'm not going to right click. I'm going to come to the menu here and merge those layers. Okay. So those layers at the moment are a completely kind of full layer of color. Okay. So what I'm going to do is duplicate that. Okay. And then I'm going to change the blend mode. So at the moment we don't see the layer behind because it's not blending with the layer. Okay. So if I now change this to darken, you can see that I start to build up these different layers and textures. Okay. So you can start to kind of add things together, but they can still seem like the same thing, right? Okay. So this would be a good texture to kind of draw over or to kind of add something to over the top. So if we then added a new layer on top of here with, say, a fill, and then a line. Okay, grab our brush tools. Oh, and actually I've got one of the brushes we're going to make later. So this is the brush I made we'll look at later. And actually I'm not going to use that one right now, although it is kind of nice. We'll just use one of the standard brushes for the moment. Okay, so this kind of forms a nice backdrop to work from. So if we start to kind of sketch over the top of this layer, cube's one of my favorite, I don't know if you guessed that, then we can start to have that kind of texture nicely in the background. We can pick a nice textured eraser, okay, and start to build stuff up, and then also start to play off against the background. Okay, this is a real simple example of where you might kind of use a texture to, you know, begin to work something up in the foreground. Okay. Any questions about that simple kind of example, what we're doing there? No? Good? Yeah. Okay, so the hue saturation gives you that control over the color, and then we're blending those layers together in different ways. And we could, of course, start to add, you know, a layer above. Okay, and then if we started to change the hue and saturation of this layer behind, I'll just add a clipping mask. So the clipping mask here for these two layers together is kind of interesting because we're blending layers with different colors now together, but because the layer behind is darkening or only darkening the layers behind, we're able to kind of blend some different colors into those layers behind. Okay, if I changed it to color, then we start to get some different effects because it's still got that white in the background as well, so we start to kind of texture things up in a different way. Okay, so it's just adding the orange color to the black here and also to the background. Okay, and then we can start to play around with those textures once we start to build things up. Okay, just flick those off for the moment. So let's just fill this up a bit. Oops. Okay, so actually I don't like this brush very much, it's too flat. That's okay. Okay, so we can create textures like this, and then let's grab one of your textures. So let's grab this guy. So we'll press V to grab the move tool. Okay, and select this layer. And copy that, and whoops, So here now we can start to get some interesting textures happening by then, let's leave that off, beginning to kind of start to add some of these blend modes into what we've got. And you can see quite quickly how we could get to the point where we could make it seem like it was drawn onto that surface or something. Okay, so this is darkening the layer behind, so there's a lot of white areas in the background, but then if we do things like color burn, it's kind of multiplying and working with those layers behind to give this interesting effect. Okay, so we can flick through these. Yeah, and then you can get some nice effects where you can actually put the texture into the line that you've drawn here. Okay, so that's using lighten. So it's a black line behind that image that we popped on there, and so now it's actually darkening that layer. Okay. All right. Sorry, lightening layer. It's lightening the black. But I'm on the layer 2 here, which is the steps and rails. Okay, so it's this image then lightening the layer behind. Okay, and then screen and color dodge will all do slightly different things, using the texture from that image to, you know, work against the line behind it. Okay, all right, so you can see how you can start to build things up and get some interesting effects going on there. Okay, so let's have a look at some of the other images that you've got. So this is an interesting one as well. So if we just grab this guy, actually this one I love, so let's just select all that. Oops. And let's paste that on there. So I'm totally doing what you shouldn't do, which is enlarging this to a massive size, so but it will work for the demo. So with something like this, we've got this really nice texture between the dark areas of the image and the black areas of the image. So if we choose darken or lighten, it's really going to push that image with the texture of this behind. So if we darken it, you can see it's darkening that. If we lighten it, then it's just going to have this nice effect where you start to really see that nice kind of texture of the image kind of pushing through into the background. Okay, so if we change this one to normal, then you can see kind of what's happening there as it pushes onto the background. Okay, so let's take this one away. So that works quite nicely to break the line up, and you can see some nice things starting to happen there. So really what we're doing there is we're knocking out the black areas of the image. Okay, so this is the same principle as someone green screening something. Okay, so if you want to knock out areas of color in an image, then you decide that you want to take out certain values of RGB, which is what we're doing here. We're taking out all the black bits of RGB and letting the white flow through to the layers behind. Okay, so that's the kind of premise of what we're doing here, and we get these nice textures as we build it up. Okay, let's have a look at another option here. So I'm going to grab, we haven't used the shape tool that much except to make the polygons that we made in the first week, I think. So let's grab the pen tool here, which is another tool for making the shape, and I think I showed some of you how to do it in a tutorial where you could take the pen tool and then stroke a brush alongside it. Okay, but for this example, what I want to do is we'll make a sort of mirrored cube behind or alongside this other cube. I don't even think that's a cube, and we'll have to delete that because I didn't make it a shape. Okay, so when you're using the pen tool, you have to make sure you select shape if you want to draw a shape. Okay, which will let me remake this. So you can see when I'm drawing with that, I now get this nice shape. I can use the direct selection tool to move it and also to edit how that shape kind of flows within my page. Okay, but the nice thing about this is that we've got a shape there that we can then throw one of these images on top of from the background. So if we grab one of these other textures, okay, and I'm going to paste this above. Okay, so this will work for any image on top of a shape, or any image on top of text as well. So this is how you would put kind of texture inside a piece of text as well. So if we now grab that, right click in the layers and go to create clipping mask, it's going to drop that shape into the drop that image into the shape behind. Okay, so you can see we can end up with some nice things going on there as well. Is that something we've kind of covered before? It feels like we might have mentioned it. Okay, so if you remember, I showed you those images of tower blocks where they kind of put images or photographs of slums alongside the tower blocks. This is how you could build something like that up with those kind of custom shapes. So you could take a shape, and I'm gonna just do that now. So if we take this shape and just manipulate it so it's roughly the same as that cube. We could also have just drawn a cube and manipulated it, or a square rather. So let's grab another texture here. Okay, so that's the same one. Okay. So again, create clipping mask, and that will allow you to kind of throw that shape or rotate it into position, so you've got these different textures along the edges of that shape. Okay, and then let's just see what happens if we pull this up above. Yes, then you start to get some nice stuff happening with those different layers working together. Okay, let's look at making a brush. So I'm going to grab a new file. Actually, let's just have a look at your Google Docs here. Oh, that's nice. So that wood texture is perfect, so you can really kind of almost draw on the wood or use it as a texture for the side of something else that you're making within Photoshop. Okay, that's nice. That's a good one. Actually, this is a good brush. So let's just so in order to get the images into Photoshop, I had to go to File, Download As, and then PDF, and then copy them from the PDF to Photoshop. So I'll just do that quickly. Should be pretty quick. Okay. Oh, that's what it is. So I want to grab this guy. So I'm going to copy this and then make a new document and paste that in there. And what I'm interested in for the brush for this is this kind of area up here where we've got this dot here and then these kind of cracks. So I'm actually going to first of all just push the contrast with an adjustment layer. Okay, because the brush is just made from black and white. Okay, so we're just making a brush from a black and white texture. So if we go to levels, okay, and then just kind of push that to a nice point there. Okay. I'm going to flatten this image after I've desaturated it. So I'll just pull all the color out of it. Oh no, that's the wrong one. Don't do that. Okay. So, and then I'm going to select a color range. So I'm going to select the kind of mid-tone areas of the image. Okay, but first of all I'm just going to flatten it. Okay, and select color range, and then just click in here, and it's showing me the black matte, so I need to extend that a little bit. That's showing me the area of the image that's selected. Okay, and if I now go to edit, I can define a brush preset. Okay, it's going to use that sample that I've got as a brush, and then I can go to my other document, grab a brush, it will go straight to the brush that I just created. Okay, let's just flip it to black and white on a new layer. Okay, so now we've got a really flat looking brush, but if we now, with that new brush, and this is where it starts to get really interesting, come up to the brush options here and look at the shape dynamics. So I'm using a pen tablet, which you'll soon be able to use if you haven't got your own one. And we're going to turn fade on for the pen. So that means that when I draw now, it will fade out in terms of size a little bit with the pen. Okay. And then here I've got scattering for the brush. So now when I paint, it's going to start to paint in different locations. Okay. Let's just turn the opacity down so it builds up a little bit more. So you can see now if I use that, we're getting some interesting texture in the background. Okay, so now if I grab the brushes panel up again, okay, and go to shape dynamics, I'm going to turn on the angle jitter, okay, and the roundness jitter, and the minimum diameter. Okay, we'll add a bit of size jitter in there as well. So basically the jitter is going to make it kind of change size. So if I reduce the size of my brush now, you can see that we've got a brush that is made up of that wood panel. Okay, and we can pick any color with that as well. So let's grab some yellow. Okay, so even when it's not looking like wood, you can see that actually it has a kind of nice texture to it that you get. Okay, and different to the kind of texture of a regular brush. But then we're not making real brushes in Photoshop, so why should we try and make a perfect paintbrush? This could be much more interesting. Okay, all right. Actually, the size is dropping down because I changed one of the settings. Oh, I know why. Because I put fade on, but I didn't put fade on pen pressure. So now that's better. Okay, so now if we paint with this, you can see we've got some nice kind of textures coming in there from that brush. And then we can go ahead and start to use the color to add color to the layer behind or something like that. Okay, so another kind of level of adding texture and interest to your brush. Okay, so I'm going to show you one I made earlier and just run you through how I would make that, because it's kind of an interesting example. So if we go to File, Open, okay, and I'm going to grab this file. So basically I make these brushes from like these little doodles, normally from meetings where I'm bored is when I make them. I recorded that, that's not good. Okay, so this is the one I showed you earlier with the cubes, and then I've got some other brushes as well, and I'm kind of interested to see how this cone will turn out. Okay, so I'm just going to grab that selection here. Okay, I'm going to copy it, make a new file, I scan these at quite high resolution. So now what I want to do is I want to lose this kind of white in the background. So I use a levels adjustment layer. Okay, pull this in so I get that nice black texture, and then all this white kind of here is this paper texture which I want to lose. So I'm going to drag that in from the right to the left, and then in the middle I can kind of decide how dark or how harsh I want that brush to be. Okay, so that's going to be what I'm going to select. So I'll go to select color range. I'm going to select the shadows of that image, and you can see I can increase the range of what I'm selecting, or I can stick to just the shadows. So somewhere around there looks pretty good. Oh, it would help if I wasn't on the levels layer, so let's flatten this first. I'll do that again. Select color range. Okay, so now you can see that's all selected, and we've got the line texture selected in there. I think it's pretty good. Okay, so if we go to edit, define brush preset, you can see we've got our cone as a brush, and we'll leave this here because we might change it in a second, and then we'll go to a new document, grab the brush, and then when we first paint it's just going to be like a flat brush shape. It's not going to really do too much. Okay, so then we need to go to the brushes, turn on the scattering, okay, the shape dynamics, the size and the angle jitter, the most interesting ones. Okay, and then you can see we start to end up with a nice kind of texture of a brush. Okay, so one other thing we can do, which is why I didn't close this up, is if we grab the brush tool, and just a regular brush this time, on a new layer, then I'll just deselect this. Okay, so I'm going to paint with grey in here around the edge of this. Okay, and then I'll just do the same here, but I'll go over it a second time. So basically the grey here, when I select it, is going to be translucent, so it's going to give our brush like some extra texture. Okay, I'm not too worried about any rough edges that might appear there too much. Okay, so if I go to select on it, flatten it first. Okay, so I'm going to go to select color range. Okay, select that, and go to edit, define brush preset, and you can see in there we've actually got a little bit of grey and darker grey in there, so that's actually going to change the way the brush applies. So we'll come back to this document and erase the background. Okay, and then we'll just change these settings, so size, angle, scattering, and then also pen pressure. Okay, and we'll cool. All right, why are we not working? Did I do too much scattering? Opacity. Try a new. Okay, alright, I'm not going to try and figure that one out now. Okay, so you can see now we start to end up with some kind of interesting textures going on there. I've definitely broken it. I've definitely... Sorry? Oh, I'm on eraser. Hey, thank you. Okay, so it was working before because I was erasing to black. Okay. Thank you. Were you all just watching that, waiting for me to find out? Okay, so I changed the eraser brush settings, so I have to change my shape dynamics for this too. Okay. So we can see now that that's starting to get a bit more interesting. Okay. I think I still didn't set the fade right. There we go. Alrighty. I think I'm starting to wane today. Okay. So actually, you can see that we're starting to build up a nice cone brush there. Okay. Any questions about setting up a brush? No? Good. There's a lot in there, I think. But basically this is what it does on its own, which is quite nice. I like that. So, okay. And then I've got a couple of others that I made earlier. So then I like the cubeness of this one. Oh no, not that one. Okay, yeah, so this is one with the shading in it as we had before. Let's flip this to a green and add some of these. Size. Let's get a angle. Okay. Okay, so this is the basic brush. But you can see with just some simple sketches you can get some nice textures and patterns going on, and it can save time too. So yeah, I think that's everything that I wanted to cover this evening. So if anyone has any questions, then fire away. Questions? I'm gonna press stop on record and then you can ask questions.